Our speaker today is Dr. Matthew Puffer. He's an assistant professor of humanities and ethics here at BU. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in chemical engineering from North Carolina State University, a master's in divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a PhD in religious studies from the University of Virginia. His wife, Becca, has a master's in public health, is a registered dietitian and nutritionist, and works here in town with Opportunity Enterprises, a nonprofit that works with persons with disabilities. Together, Dr. Puffer and his wife have 3 children who are 8, 7, and 3. Prior to joining the faculty at Valparaiso, Dr. Puffer held postdoctoral fellowships at Villanova University and the UVA Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture. And before his graduate studies, Dr. Puffer taught high school physics and moral philosophy, coached soccer, and served on staff for several years with Young Life, a Christian volunteer organization that works with high school and college students. Dr. Puffer's scholarly interests include medical ethics, economic ethics, engineering ethics, and also comparative religious ethics. He's especially interested in and has published several articles and book chapters on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, about whom we'll be hearing more today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Matthew Puffer. These are changing the guard here.
Check, check. Yes?
Yes.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I know that you are here not by choice, but you're a captive audience, and I'm super grateful to be here with you. I think this is going to be fun. By show of hands, how many of you have heard of or had some impression of who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was before you saw this or heard about this on your core syllabus? Some awareness, familiarity. Okay, so maybe I see maybe like a dozen hands going up out there. Okay, fantastic. Let me ask you also, why are we here? It's a rhetorical question. The reason we're here today is every October, Valparaiso University remembers the Reformation. You remember the Reformation in October because on October 31st, 1518, 500 and almost 1 year ago, I gather? No, I'm sorry. I keep saying
1517.
Thank you, 1517. 1518 was the Heidelberg Disputation, I think. All right, so 1517. So, but 501 years ago, a Lutheran, well, his name was Martin Luther. He eventually became Lutheran once he was had his own thing, if you will. Went and nailed some theses to a door, 95 theses, announcing a debate, announcing, hey, we're going to need to discuss these things. And we at Valparaiso University are part of this tradition. And this year, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is the figure that we're looking at together. Every year we have a figure or an event that we look at, remembering the Reformation. And Bonhoeffer is a really fun figure. In the 20th century, he's maybe the most well-known German Lutheran theologian of the 20th century, maybe almost definitely the case. So I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss Dietrich Bonhoeffer. The first thing I want to do is have everyone turn to your neighbor, say hello, greet one another. And I want to ask the question, you can put your arms around one another if you'd like. I want to ask the question, who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer? And I want you to choose a word or two. Some of you had heard of Bonhoeffer before you got here. Some of you heard about Bonhoeffer while you were here. But a word or two that kind of gives your impression, a description of who this person is, maybe a fact about him or a characteristic about him. But how do you describe, what's your impression of this person based on what you've encountered? Go, you have 30 seconds. I'll stop you in just a moment. Okay, I can hear some of you, but I'm going to ask, because you guys can't hear one another, raise your hand out loud, real loud, project. What were some of the impressions that were shared? Either yours or someone else shared it with you. A word or two or short description. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, what do we know? Please.
Believed in his convictions, as long as he served the will of God, he could die happy.
Strongly believed in his convictions, may have had some strong opinions about the will of God, dying happy. Dying happy is not usually the first thing we use to describe someone, but we'll go with that. Yeah?
He was a double agent.
He was a double agent, okay? And an agent for, double agent of, we'll ask someone else. All right, double agent. That's God's will, double agent. What else? I like this. This is good. Can't see if I put like my ass. You were all just talking. I know you have ideas. Impressions. What do you think? Yeah, no, I already heard from you. Yes.
A rebel?
A rebel. Okay. A double agent rebel. He's interested in God's will. Keep going. Yes.
He's like interested in getting to know other cultures.
Fantastic. Yeah. Intellectually curious in other cultures. Interested in getting to know other cultures. Hugely important. Hugely significant. We'll talk more about this. All right. I need one more. Who's going to be the volunteer? Thank you. Yes.
He's open to learn about other Christian churches.
Okay, very open to learning about other Christian churches and maybe broader than that, but maybe we haven't encountered that. We've alluded to a couple things that I think maybe everyone's assuming that we all already know, and so we're just not saying it because it seems too obvious. Can someone say the most obvious things maybe that you've heard about this person?
He's German.
He's German. Dietrich gives that one away, perhaps? All right, well, you're not going to say that's what, yeah, thank you. He disliked the Nazis. How much did he dislike the Nazis? He wanted to kill Hitler. Okay, and I see a bunch of people now nodding their heads yes, like, I can't believe you made us say that or something. All right, so we do know some things about this guy. Who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer? If we were playing Family Feud, ding, 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 there's number one. That's what's going to come in. Survey says, attempted to assassinate Hitler. Killed, martyred. Someone says something about willing to die or something like this. That's often comes up. This is someone who people often describe as a martyr, killed for participating in resistance. And then I heard, nobody said this exactly, I did hear it right here. He's a theologian, he's a theological person. He wrote some books. Anybody here read any of Bonhoeffer's books? Maybe Cost of Discipleship, like Together? Okay, I got some heads nodding and whatnot. All right, I think this is the picture that often comes to mind, and I'm going to need a little bit of help here to get this started. How many of you have seen Valkyrie? Tom Cruise movie? Okay. For some folks, this is what comes to mind when they think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and we'll watch 60 seconds of this.
Gentlemen, we can save Europe from total destruction.
We have to show the world that not all of us will like him. It is too great a risk.
It doesn't change what we must do.
What did you have in mind?
You could serve Germany or the Fuhrer. Not both.
It's just that talk that had you sent here, Colonel.
What I said was much worse.
I'm a soldier. But in serving my country, I have betrayed my conscience. We need to reorganize. There has to be a chance of success. That's why you're here.
Hitler's Germany has seen its last sunrise. Can I count you in?
So that's one picture I think we have of Dietrich Bonhoeffer that's out in the culture, this kind of revolutionary, radical, I think was used, or something like this. This figure who was willing to sacrifice a whole lot in resisting Hitler. Maybe you get the Tom Cruise version. He's playing Count von Stauffenberg, Count Stauffenberg. And you have this dramatic, intense existence that like none of us could sustain for more than like half an hour at a time, or maybe we can watch it for a couple hours. Then we get this picture. We get this saintly figure, this person who is kind of this religious, maybe like, all about singing Kumbaya, singing songs together around a campfire, running a seminary. Here we have a picture. Does anyone know where this is? Anyone know what structure this is? Some of you have probably been here. This is Westminster Abbey in London. Westminster Abbey has a 20th century martyrs wall here. And some of these figures will look familiar as well. Second from the left is someone you read a few weeks ago. Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero. Second from the right, Dietrich Bonhoeffer on the far right here. And then we have the figure, this conception of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, someone who wrote a lot of books. There's a lot of writing there. You guys write a lot of papers too. If you added it up, it accumulates over time. Some of these are student papers. Some of those are actually really fascinating, really fun reads. But who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer? What I want to do today is look a little bit at Dietrich Bonhoeffer's biography. I want to look at the themes that you've been looking at in core through your various readings, themes of empathy and dialogue, and ask, I think they provide some really fascinating entry points into Bonhoeffer's life, writings, and legacy, and things that have been written about him. So we're going to do a little bit with empathy and dialogue, especially looking at one particular year. And then lastly, at the very end, we're going to come back, and I think most of you, if not all of you, have read or had assigned to read, not always the same thing, After 10 Years, which is the letter that he circulated in 1942, 1943, among the fellow conspirators and people in his family about what it is that we're doing here in resisting Hitler. All right, so diving right in. Who is Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his twin sister Sabina were born February 4th, 1906. That's the year Einstein published his papers on the special theory of relativity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was living in Germany. They were the 6th and 7th of 8 children born to Paula and Karl Bonhoeffer. And the Bonhoeffer family was an upper middle class, very well educated Lutheran family, though not regular churchgoers. His mother Paula was among a few women of her generation who had an opportunity to earn a university degree. And his father, Karl, was the leading psychiatrist and neurologist in all of Berlin. He held the chair of psychiatry at the University of Berlin from 1914 to 1948. And the University of Berlin is known as the mother of modern universities because universities all over the world, the 19th century and 20th century, are modeled after the University of Berlin's Modern Research University model. Now, the family was devastated when the 2 older brothers went off to war, World War I, the Great War, and Bonhoeffer's oldest brother, Karl Friedrich, came back, and they were very tight. His second oldest brother, the second oldest, Walter, was wounded in battle, had surgery, and did not survive the battle wounds. When Dietrich Bonhoeffer was confirmed the following year, so that was 1918, in 1919 Dietrich Bonhoeffer was confirmed into the church. He received Walter's Bible, and that became his personal Bible for the rest of his life. His family always remembered and went to the gravesite, Walter's gravesite, every year around Christmas and New Year's. The family was actually shocked, however, when young Dietrich, 13, 14 years old, announced that he wanted to study theology when he went to university. His older siblings had undertaken studies in chemistry and law, and the parents and siblings alike socialized and could walk back and forth between the university and their neighborhood with the leading German intellectuals of the day. Actually, Albert Einstein was teaching at the University of Berlin when Bonhoeffer was studying there. Now, Bonhoeffer's primary theological interest was the church, and he gradually moved, and he was greatly moved, by travels to Rome and to the Vatican in 1925. Bonhoeffer completed his first doctorate at the University of Berlin in 1927 at the age of 21. His dissertation was called Communio Sanctorum, or Communion of Saints. And you'll see over on the left side there, if you can read down at the bottom, there's a little blurb that says Karl Barth, and next to it says a theological miracle. Now that's kind of a nice compliment to have said about your 21-year-old dissertation when you write your dissertation at 21. I wonder what that would be like. But Karl Barth, some of you may know, is considered by many to have been the greatest theologian of the 20th century. Pope Pius XII, not Protestant like Barth, said of Karl Barth that he was the greatest theologian since Thomas Aquinas. So that's like in 7 centuries. He's highly regarded. And he looked at this dissertation by a 21-year-old and referred to it as a theological miracle. No small compliment paid to Dietrich Bonhoeffer at a young age. Bonhoeffer's second doctorate, his second dissertation is titled Act and Being. He wrote this while he was serving as a pastoral assistant in Barcelona, Spain, as well as a research university assistant at the University of Berlin. Published in 1930, Bonhoeffer was 24 years old at the time. So that's enough of background for just now. At this point, I want to slow down considerably. Bonhoeffer's 24 years old. It's 1930. And I want to look at 3 influential moments in Bonhoeffer's life, or 3 influences in the 1930-1931 year of this high-powered academic prodigy when he studies abroad in New York City. So in Bonhoeffer's 1930-31 academic year, New York, he also spends time in Bonn in the summer of 31. But we find him developing empathy through relationships with Albert Fischer and his fellow Sloan Fellows at Union Theological Seminary, Edwin Sutz and Jean Lasserre. After we look at these relationships, we'll look at a second influential experience that Bonhoeffer has in dialogue with Karl Barth in Bonn when Bonhoeffer returns that summer. Now, a chapter titled, I Heard the Gospel Preached in the Negro Churches, in Charles Marsh's Bonhoeffer biography, takes us through several formative experiences during Bonhoeffer's year studying abroad in New York at Union Theological Seminary. It was a year that included a 6-month immersion in the African American community at the height of the Harlem Renaissance. Now, did any of you guys, some of your professors assign this week? Anybody read? Okay. I see 2 people, so maybe 1 class. All right, that's great. Bonhoeffer has an incredibly formative experience. As he's journeying on this luxury liner, SS Columbus, though, I think we get a vantage of how this experience evolves. As Bonhoeffer's on this boat, we get a glimpse, I think, of a German upper-class perspective on how he's viewing the world. Here's what Bonhoeffer writes. He says, in a letter to his mother, he says, I haven't actually seen my cabin mate. I hope he doesn't turn out to be an old German prole. Now, this is not a compliment. This is Bonhoeffer's way of referring to someone else as being of a lower class, a prole being a proletariat. Bonhoeffer was not from the proletariat class. He was very much from the upper class of German society, a very educated class. And from this starting point, I think we get to see Bonhoeffer's year at Union as kind of a process of evolution and empathy with different people that he comes in contact with. 2 particular experiences I want to focus on are catalysts, I think, for Bonhoeffer opening up to the sufferings of others. And by the way, neither of these experiences took place in the classroom. They took place out in the classroom of life, if you will. Only 24 years old at the time, but having completed 2 doctorates, Bonhoeffer was utterly disappointed about the quality of graduate school theological training for the future pastors and professors that he was encountering. In a letter to his brother Carl Friedrich, he wrote that, quote, the students on the average 25 to 30 years old, so all older than him, are completely clueless, like first semester freshmen. Now, what a mean thing to say. Anyway, he's early. He's starting out. He's going to evolve. All right. So Bonhoeffer was impacted, in spite of this assessment of the state of theological training, he's greatly impacted by a couple professors and their practical approach to theology. One professor in particular, Reinhold Niebuhr, with whom he took several courses, including one in African American literature, were very influential. Bonhoeffer read Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and there we go. W.E.B. Du Bois and County Cullen's The Black Christ. Now you may recall Martin Luther King's allusion to Niebuhr in Letter from Birmingham City Jail. Martin Luther King Jr. Says that Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us groups are more immoral than individuals. Same Reinhold Niebuhr, very influential for both of these figures. Now, Niebuhr impressed upon his students, including Bonhoeffer, the need to flesh out the practical and social implications of theological ideas. What does that mean? Well, 9 years later, in 1939, Niebuhr helped to secure an invitation for Bonhoeffer and in the culture of the black church. With Fisher, Bonhoeffer not only attended church, but led weekly Sunday school classes for children and adults. They also traveled to Fisher's alma mater, Howard College, now Howard University, an HBCU in Washington, D.C., and met with, quote, young leaders in the Negro movement while they were there. While in D.C., Bonhoeffer was also refused service for being with Fisher at a segregated restaurant. All of these experiences would have a great impact on Bonhoeffer. Now, Reggie Williams, the Bonhoeffer scholar, observes that Bonhoeffer, quote, remains the only prominent white theologian of the 20th century to speak about racism as a Christian problem. Harlem provided what he needed to see the world differently and to imagine a different way of being a Christian within it. And he learned it from the Black Christ, says Williams. Now, Albert Fisher, Bonhoeffer's friend, would go on to pastor in Atlanta, and in 1957 was arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of Atlanta's city buses, alongside another Baptist minister from Birmingham, Alabama, one Martin Luther King Jr. Until Dr. King's assassination a decade later, Fisher would strive together with a younger Dr. King in the fight for civil rights and social justice in the American South. A second important community of friends from Bonhoeffer's year abroad included an American, Paul Raymond, and two other international students at Union, Erwin Sutz of Switzerland and Jean Lasserre from France. Together, they took in the sights of New York and exchanged views on politics in the aftermath of World War I, the Great War. With Germany having defeated France before eventually losing the war, and Switzerland bordering both nations but remaining neutral in the war, you can imagine that this is an uncommon post-war international friendship. The Frenchman, the Swiss, and the German. A particularly poignant experience of empathy occurred at the movies one night, when together they viewed All Quiet on the Western Front. Jean Lasserre, the Frenchman, recalled the irony of that moment. Quote, the theater was full, the audience was American, but since the film had been made from the German soldiers' point of view, everyone immediately sympathized with them. When French soldiers were killed on screen, the crowd laughed and applauded. On the other hand, when the German soldiers were wounded or killed, there was a great silence and a sense of deep emotion. This was a difficult experience for both of us because we were seated next to each other, he a German and I a Frenchman. I was very affected, and he was also affected, but because of me. I think it was there that both of us discovered that the community of the church, is much more important than the national community. As with Fisher, these three internationals did a fair amount of traveling together. Bonhoeffer and Sutz to Cuba in December 1930, and Bonhoeffer, Sutz, and Lasserre to Chicago. In fact, on Route 30, they drove from Fort Wayne to Indiana, to Gary, Indiana, and you'll know that Route 30 cuts right across our campus, a couple hundred yards this way. Traveling on Route 30 to Chicago and then south from Chicago to Mexico. In both cases, Bonhoeffer was deeply impacted by his experiences traveling not only abroad, but also through the Jim Crow South. Dietrich exchanged letters with his eldest brother, lamenting the state of American racial injustices and the plight of African Americans and the evident lack of concern among white Christians. The separation of whites from blacks in the southern states really does make a rather shameful impression. The pastors are no better than the others. Another echo of King's letter from Birmingham prison. It is a bit unnerving that in a country with so inordinately many slogans about brotherhood, peace, and so on, such things still continue completely uncorrected. His brother knew something of the oppression of African Americans from his own travels in the States. In a callous and perhaps unguarded comment that demonstrates little anticipation of the outbreak of violent anti-Semitism that was about to spread across Europe, Carl Friedrich wrote, "In any event, our Jewish question is a joke compared with it, that is the Negro problem." Only a few would still claim that they, the Jews, are repressed here in Germany. After his year at Union, Bonhoeffer returned to Germany in order to take a teaching position at the University of Berlin. First, however, Bonhoeffer went to Bonn, Germany, and spent 3 weeks with the person who would become a mentor and a friend, the Swiss theologian Karl Barth. Bonhoeffer was amused to find himself treated as an outsider among Barth's students. They considered Bonhoeffer a, quote, theological bastard, an illegitimate child of impure breed. Bonhoeffer would write, "They have a sharp scent for thoroughbreds here. No Negro passes for white." Fortunately, unlike his students, Barth himself was both far more welcoming and quite impressive. Bonhoeffer continued, "I have seldom regretted anything in my theological past so much as the fact that I did not go to him sooner. I have been impressed even more by discussions with him than by his writings and his lectures. I have never seen anything like it." One of Barth's students recalled the first time Bonhoeffer attended their regular evening seminar. Sitting in the background somewhere, Bonhoeffer contributed a comment and quoted Martin Luther's statement saying that the curses of the godless are sometimes sound better to God's ears than the hallelujahs of the pious. At that, Barth jumped up and said, "That's great stuff. Where is that quotation? And who in the world are you?" That's how Dietrich Bonhoeffer called that. In retrospect, Bonhoeffer himself identifies a third turning point during the years after his academic study of theology. Bonhoeffer wrote to his close friend and perhaps a romantic interest, Elizabeth Zinn, about something that he says changed and transformed my life to this very day. "For the first time, I came to the Bible. I had often preached. I had seen a great deal of the church. And yet, I was not yet a Christian." The Bible, especially the Sermon on the Mount, Bonhoeffer continues, had freed him from his pride and from his ambition. That was a great liberation, he writes. Then came the crisis of 1933. Looking back at the episodes of empathy and dialogue, we can see a variety of experiences that shaped Bonhoeffer to be the sort of person that he was. And as you can see, these experiences that are in ways both familiar and available to us to pursue in our own day, while we look at these sorts of experiences and value them for how they cultivate capacities of empathy, as we follow Bonhoeffer's life beyond 1931, we see 3 episodes in which empathizing with those who suffer, with the oppressed, resulted in quite different judgments about his own responsibility. That is to say, having empathy cultivated doesn't yet tell us what responsibility looks like. From 1931 to 1933, Bonhoeffer taught theology in Berlin and had a front row seat as the world was turned upside down by the rise of populist sentiment, the political victories of National Socialism, and the January 30th, 1933 election or ascension of Hitler to the chancellorship. In a matter of a few months, the German people witnessed the rewriting of social norms, race laws, and the abrogation of the national constitution in order to streamline the national government. This process of Gleichschaltung or synchronization aimed to bring into alignment all aspects of national life and culture, so as to eliminate not only inefficiencies, but also all possibility of political resistance and disagreement. This included the March 24th dissolution of the German democracy and the April 7th passage of the Aryan paragraph in the Third Reich, which forbade all non-Aryans from holding state offices, including in the state church and in state universities. In the spring of 1933, Bonhoeffer's students in Berlin were participating in the Gleichschaltung with great enthusiasm. With great bonfires for burning books of all the non-Aryan and especially Jewish academics, including Albert Einstein, Thomas Mann, and Sigmund Freud. Thus began the decade over which Bonhoeffer would look back and write after 10 years, the text that nearly all of you read this week. In that text, Bonhoeffer exhibits both considerable dizziness, morally speaking, do we have any ground beneath our feet, and incredible confidence in a sense of quality, in the possibility of discerning a way forward. In the midst of all the chaos of 1933, Bonhoeffer, with all of his empathy for those who are suffering, still, he hardly knew what to do, unlike the later text, perhaps. Bonhoeffer's immediate reaction to all this was utter dismay. How could so many German Christians have elected such a vulgar fool, acting the part of a strong man? On February 1st, just 2 days after the election, Bonhoeffer went on the radio and gave an address in which he criticized the Führer principle, or the cult of leadership, and sought to give an explanation for how the various generations, and here we can think of baby boomers and Gen X and millennials in our own day, how the various generations had given rise to such a misleader. Later that week, Bonhoeffer reached out to Reinhold Niebuhr, saying that Germany needed a civil liberties union that would protect the rights of vulnerable minorities, similar to the work of the ACLU that he had learned about from Niebuhr while at Union. In fact, Bonhoeffer was involved in countless efforts to raise critical objections to widespread Christian nationalism at a time when German churches were all too willing to vote a strongman into power to restore their nation to greatness. And yet, Bonhoeffer, with all of his empathy, found himself largely impotent to change the minds of those around him, never mind the direction of his culture. Given his many accomplishments and education, the experience of this inability to convince his fellow Germans and Christians of the errors of their ways generated a new kind of self-doubt and uncertainty that Bonhoeffer had never before known. And this is exactly what we see in a dialogue with Karl Barth after exasperated Bonhoeffer leaves Germany for a position in London where he thinks he might be of greater use. Teaching at the university amidst all of the chaos of the spring of 1933, Bonhoeffer felt called to take a position as a pastor and had received offers for pastorates in both London and in Berlin. Out of solidarity with those non-Aryan pastors who were being kicked out of and excluded from serving in the German churches under National Socialism, Bonhoeffer accepted a call to pastor a church of German immigrants in London. Bonhoeffer arrived in London on October 17th, and a week later reached out to Karl Barth in a rather sheepish letter apologizing for his departure. I'm now writing the letter I meant to write to you 6 weeks ago. I simply withdrew without telling you. Bonhoeffer notes both his solidarity with the Jewish Christian pastors and his sense of isolation and the lack of confidence to continue in the path of resistance on which he began in 1933. I knew that I could not accept a pastorate for which I had been longing. It would have meant abandoning my solidarity with the Jewish Christian pastors, he writes. I suspect that this resonates with some of us here who have, on occasion, looked at the world around us and wondered if people have lost their minds. Bonhoeffer writes, I was becoming increasingly isolated in my views of the matter, even though I was and remained personally close to these people. All this frightened me and shook my confidence, since there seemed no particular reason why my own view in these matters should be any better than theirs. Some of us in this room have found ourselves in situations where we've arrived at views diametrically opposed to family and friends who we love and who we deeply respect. In this dialogue, Bonhoeffer invites Bart to offer his own critical perspective. Bart's reply is candid, to say the least. Get back to your post in Berlin straight away. What is that about you going into the wilderness when you are needed in Germany? You need to be here with all guns blazing. All of us, he writes, are suffering under the enormous difficulty of making straight paths for our feet through the present chaotic situation. You're not alone. Although he clearly understands Bonhoeffer's conflicted feelings, Bart shows far greater confidence in Bonhoeffer's abilities than Bonhoeffer does in himself. And Bart exhibits far greater certainty about where these capacities are most needed. In London, not in London, in Berlin, even in the midst of the chaos and the uncertainty. 20 years younger than Bart, Bonhoeffer had reached out to him as a mentor for guidance, and Bart demonstrates a willingness to speak hard truths. It's quite a gift. Interestingly, Bonhoeffer did not follow Bart's advice. Instead, he remained in London for 2 years. By the time he returned in 1935, the situation had deteriorated considerably. Bart had already been expelled from his professorship for refusing to pledge allegiance to Hitler and had been forced to leave, taking a position at the University of Basel in Switzerland. For 2 years, from 1935 to 37, Bonhoeffer took up a position running a non-state-sanctioned seminary in Finkenwald. There, Bonhoeffer used to play the records of the African-American spirituals that he and Albert Fischer had purchased in Harlem, using them as a way of teaching the experience of Christian life under the conditions of oppression, an experience that was new for his students. It was out of this context that Bonhoeffer wrote his two most well-known works, Discipleship and Cost of Discipleship, and Life Together. In 1937, the seminary was deemed illegal and shut down by the Gestapo. 27 of his seminary students were arrested. His license to teach at the university was revoked. He was banned for a time from living in or even visiting his family in Berlin. And he had to help his sister and her non-Aryan husband escape Germany. In 1939, with World War II seemingly inevitable, Bonhoeffer returned to America from Germany at the invitation of Reinhold Niebuhr, in the hopes of sparing Bonhoeffer from serving in the Nazi German army. Upon his arrival in New York, Bonhoeffer quickly realized that he had made a mistake. One can hear the echoes of Bart's admonition that Germany needs him in Bonhoeffer's 1939 letter to Reinhold Niebuhr. There he writes, "I have made a mistake in coming to America. Christians in Germany will face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that Christian civilization may survive, or willing the victory of their nation and thereby destroying our civilization. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice in security." I want to close with one last episode that illustrates the sort of guilt-laden ethic of responsibility that Bonhoeffer lays out after 10 years and you guys read about this week. After returning from New York to Germany, Bonhoeffer's empathy towards his fellow Germans suffering under Hitler led him to take up a position in the German military intelligence, the Abwehr. Now, this meant not only participating in an assassination plot, but lying to nearly everyone around him, except for only those absolutely closest, family and a few friends. Now, he returned in 1939, and he was arrested in 1943. It's 4 years of lying, professionally, socially, traveling internationally. On June 17, 1940, the day France surrendered to Germany, Bonhoeffer was with his close friend Eberhard Bethge relaxing in an open-air cafe, when suddenly a special announcement came over the loudspeaker that France had surrendered. Bethke wrote, "The people around the tables could hardly contain themselves. They jumped up, and some even climbed on the chairs. With outstretched arms, they sang Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, and the Horst Wessel song. We stood up too. Bonhoeffer raised his arm in the regulation Hitler salute, while I sat there dazed. Raise your arm. Are you crazy? He whispered to me. And later, we shall have to run risks for very different things now, but not for that salute. Now, I promised to save some time for Q&A, so here's what I want to do now. I want to pause just a moment and ask how what we've heard today about Bonhoeffer, his time at Union, Theological Seminary, Harlem, Bart, his turn to the Bible, how do these help us receive and understand, challenge, question the ethic that we read about in After 10 Years? And I'll preface it with this. You guys read a letter from Birmingham City Jail in which Martin Luther King Jr. writes about breaking the law and what do you do with unjust laws. And you'll remember what he had to say. One who breaks an unjust law must do it openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. This sounds a lot like Bonhoeffer in 1933. Unwilling to take a job in the German church openly because of the laws, and therefore he had to go to London, or therefore he went to London. Bonhoeffer's later ethic, standing up, doing the Hitler salute. Karl Barth wouldn't do the Hitler salute. Wouldn't pledge allegiance. Kicked out. Goes back to Switzerland. Bonhoeffer does. Bonhoeffer has a statue at Westminster Abbey. Karl Barth doesn't. What do we make of these different ethics? How do we think about after 10 years? How do we think about empathy and dialogue and responsibility in light of the witness of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life, in light of what we've read? We're low on time, so I'd love to take a couple questions. I want to make sure a question or two, and then we'll be out of here. Yes, please.
Sorry, this is a question.
No, it's not.
Did Bonhoeffer ever meet Martin Luther King?
No, you did not. Great, yeah, fine, Kevin. Yes. He did, didn't he? And he's working for the German military intelligence. And if you're not willing to stand up and celebrate when France surrenders, and you're in the German military intelligence, you're not going to be in the German military intelligence much longer, are you? That's a very practical answer. The ethical answer is a bit more complicated, isn't it? Yeah. I think we see the question, yes? We see that this is a problem, it's a challenge, it's a difficult challenge. And Bonhoeffer represents and articulates a way of thinking about these challenges. And I'm just alerting us to the fact that this is a very different way of thinking about things, in many respects, than what King has offered us. I've got 19 after. One more? All right, that's fine. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday.